So let's carry on with the conversation, especially as it relates to these filters and the things that coming into us. Like I mentioned before, we're not islands. Our story must be in context. So we're churning this thing inside of us, but if we're not in context of the world around us, it's not going to mean very much. And in this case, we're also a vehicle. One of the terms that Paul uses is that we are living epistles, letters written by God on our hearts, so that we can express or incarnate God in the world around us. That's a fine line, especially with this agenda speak that I've been talking about, that it's very easy to say, I am nothing, I'm a living epistle, I'm going to preach the gospel through my film, like the guys in Hyde Park that step out in the box and start yelling at people, regardless of the response. Because they see themselves as a living epistle, and they just need to read the Word of God. And if they do like they do in Christchurch in the square in New Zealand, guys will get up on the corner there and they'll just scream the scriptures. Because the Bible says that the Word of God will go out and will not return void. And so it's easy to get weird and cross that line and go, just because it's Jesus somehow in this, I don't care what the critics say, it's going to bless one person, at least, And it might. Some other crazy person might relate to your craziness. Or one person might just be flicking through and find the most lamest thing that somebody bought off of you for $30 and threw it on their cable channel because they were, lacking programming. And some kid looks at it and goes, oh, that makes me think about not killing myself tonight. So they don't. Yay you, that's okay. But honestly, I don't think it's enough. And I think so because there's way more that we could be doing. And that's an excuse to say, well, if it touches one person, it's worth me being lame. Or preaching or yelling at people or whatever. Not good enough. So the Bible says that we should be excellent at what is good. And so in order to be excellent at what is good, we have to realize that our story must be in context. We are not an island. And these living epistles are living amongst other epistles and other letters that bounce off of us. So in that case, what I want to do is start looking at how that heart, soul, mind, and strength stuff all churns in with the external world around us. And the external world around us is, I can't define it all. I've just listed a few things here. Tension. The tension in the world around us is massive. It's why I wake up every morning and I read 5 different newspapers online, because I want to know what's the tension in the world. And I also am tracking signs of the times, like what's really going on. Because Jesus said, you should be able to get this. It shouldn't be that hard. So I'm tracking the signs of the times. I'm also tracking tension. Where's the tension in the world? There's an excellent school that we run in Wyram, Switzerland, called the APC, the Advanced Principles of Communication. And in this school, the students decide the top 10 issues facing the world today as reported in the news. So you don't get to pick what you think is important, like prayer in schools, not important. And instead you have to go to the newspapers and journalists around the world and say, what are they saying that people think is important? Not that it's always an accurate indicator, but it's pretty close. And so you pick the top 10 issues. Oil prices, genetic engineering, things that are in the news all the time. And then you've got, during the course of 3 months, you have to take 10 articles per issue, which is 100 articles altogether, and analyze them from 3 points of view. One is, how many questions can you ask about this issue? So you don't get to pontificate. You don't get to say, oh, this problem means this answer, and Jesus would be able to do. You don't get to even say that. You just have to say, why is Chavez doing that? Why is the price of oil so high? What does his wife think about him? You have to ask 50 to 100 questions per article. And you don't get to make any statements about it. No judging, just questions. The second thing is, what's the pain involved in this person's life? And what's the pain in my life as regards this issue? And you have to do that 100 times with 50 to 100 questions per article. And it makes you think about tension very differently. First it gets you off your horse and off of, here's my answer to everything, which I know very little about anyway, but here's what you think you know. And it starts moving you into questions like, what's going on? And how's that related to this? And what's the relationship between these things? And then you get into the pain issue. Like, who does this cost what? And then you start thinking differently about issues and tension. And if you're willing for that pain to be part of your life, if you're willing to open up to it, you start looking at the story differently. You're not thinking in terms of, here's my quick fix to this issue, or here's how I'd sum this up or find resolution. Instead, it's, what is God really doing, because God's always working on pain. God's always working on the real heart issues. And those heart issues is what you find in the questions. So when you go out as a preacher, you just try to find the fastest possible connection between the 2 points, sell the solution, move on. If you go out as a journalist or as a human, then you go out and you start finding the pain. And then you're exposed to tension. And that tension is one of the external influences. Inspiration's another thing. The fall, creation, the spirit, history, relationships, all the things that are in your world or around your world, these are the external influences that come into informing or influencing your story. And the question is, are they? Are they informing and influencing us, or do we block and judge so quickly that nothing actually even gets in the filter, and I don't have anything to say because in fact, I only have one thing to say over and over and over again, because I'm never learning from these things. So for instance, if we take something like inspiration and how inspiration moves through us, we can come back into, for instance, Tolkien's time. Tolkien was in the trenches in World War I in France, and it was his impression of fascism and later on communism that informed his view of the dark side of the world. And in this case, his character development of what evil actually looked like. So that was forged, I think, in the influence of being in the trenches and being subjected to fascism, being subjected to not just reading the news like I do, but actually being in the story and seeing the devastating results of pure evil and how it just destroys things. And I think that affected his macro view of how to tell that story later on. So just a small example of how that works. Another example of this is a guy named Ross Jeffries. Ross Jeffries, have you guys seen Magnolia? Magnolia is a film that Paul Thomas Anderson did. Brilliant filmmaker. Just did There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis. And a great writer and director, good storyteller. Friend of his tells Paul Thomas Anderson about a radio show with this guy Ross Jeffries in it, and the guy's a sex doctor, and a really, really crass, kind of, grotesque, evil sort of sex doctor sort of character, always trying to talk about how men can dominate women, and the guy's just like, this is so LA, but it just really impacts him and affects him. So through that radio program and through his relationships and also through other things, he starts to develop this character here, which you might have remembered in the film as T.J. Mackey, Frank T.J. Mackey. And I won't even repeat some of his lines because the F word's nothing compared to what this guy was doing. This is something Flannery O'Connor said at this point. She says, "I mortally and strongly defend the right of the artist to select a negative aspect of the world, to portray, and as the world gets more materialistic, there will be more to select from. Of course, you are only enabled to see what is black by having light to see it by. Furthermore, the light that you see by may be altogether outside of the work itself." Did you catch the last line? The light that you see by may be altogether outside of the work that what you're doing. So you don't bring the point of reference that you have into that story because it may not be true to the story. So if you're identifying something grotesque like these angry, sex champions or really misogynist men trying to teach other misogynist men how to, abuse women, your reference point to see that is because you may understand intimacy, or you may understand the place or the role of sexuality and friendship together, or society in general in this regard. And because you get that, because you have that light, you can see how gross this is, which informs your character development. And you may even push him even further into the dark than he was in the first place when you found him, because you have that light and you have that reference. But you don't bring the reference point back into the story because it may not be integral to that part of the story, which is why she said, furthermore, the light you see by may be altogether outside of the work itself. Does that make sense? You don't bring Jesus into the movie. He's not the story. The contrast between intimacy and misogyny, or the hatred of women, the abuse of women, that's the story, or this part of the story. And you see it because you know Jesus, but you don't bring Jesus into the story. He's not the story in this case. That's what an agenda does. It always tries to squeak him in there and fit him in there and cram him over there and try to say something. But by doing so, you destroy the story because you just distracted people from the real point. And that is the right of the artist to select a negative aspect of the world to portray it. And that comes back to what we were talking about earlier with how dark can you go? How much pain can you show? How much, should that girl kiss that other girl to show that part? Because personally you think, well, I wouldn't kiss another girl. I mean, personally I would, but you know what I mean? You think, I can't do that, so therefore it shouldn't be in the film. No, that's not the story. You're not the reference. You know it's important because of your reference, but you're not the reference, so you don't interject yourself into the story. Now this is story 101 for most people. Everybody gets this. The problem for us as Christians is that we've lost our minds. We've lost our ability to naturally understand the difference because we've been pushed to sell this thing over and over and over again. And therefore it's really hard for us just to draw back and go, my reference isn't part of the story. It helps me see light and dark, but I don't interject myself into that or Jesus or any of those other points of reference. It informs me. It doesn't become a central part of the story. That's why I like this lady so much. I just think that's an incredible, perceptive thing to be a person who's deeply in love with God in the 50s and 60s, in the Deep South, for her to come up with that kind of clarity and objective reality in their craft. I just think it's incredible. So, here's the deal. We have heart, soul, mind, and strength. These are the facilities that God's given us to be able to craft and forge stuff. Like I said, it's natural, it's there, and it's in us. We also have these external influences. And as a result of these external influences, we also have worldview. So, for instance, inspiration, like Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia came after the death of his father. He also is trying to tell this epic kind of LA tale using urban legends and all this different stuff sort of mixed in together. And so he's inspired by that, but he has a filter. And part of his filter is his worldview. So he gets LA. He gets some of these aspects that are happening. And because of his worldview, he can translate. So that's the external thing coming through you and being able to come out interesting because you're important. Your filter isn't necessarily evil just because I said be careful not to put too much of you in it. But it's not completely gone because then you're not there. And anybody can write the story and you're not even valuable anymore in the process. So you have filters, and I want to talk about three of them. I want to talk about worldview, I want to talk about judgment, and I want to talk about agendas. And as I'm doing that, I want you to think through the stories that you've been working on lately and the things that you've been writing, and I want you to consider, how am I varying on this thing? Because eventually those things can mount up and cloud the issue, or they can actually enhance and make it stronger. And I'm going to start by making the point that they cloud the issue, and then come back later to what could happen. Okay, let's look at a scene here from Magnolia.
Wow. A lot of stuff here, huh? Cats and dogs out there, huh? You must have a lot going on for all that stuff back there, huh? You could have quite a party with all that stuff. You've been on Prozac long? Dexedrine? Interesting, because Dexedrine's basically speed and pill, you know? But I guess a lot of the doctors are balancing out the Prozac with the Dexedrine, so that liquid morphine, that'll knock you down, out, around, up and down, someone's not careful. Mix those up, yeah. Strong stuff here, boy. Wow. What exactly went wrong with you, though? What?
You fucking asshole. Who the fuck do you think you are? I come in here, you don't know me, you don't know who I am, what my life is, and you have the balls, the decency to ask me a question about my life? What you do? Don't you call me lady? I come in here, I give these things to you, you check, you make your phone calls, look suspicious, ask questions. I'm sick. I have sickness all around me, and you fucking ask me my life? What's wrong? I'm using that in your bed, in your house. Where's your fucking decency? And then I'm asked fucking questions. What? Wrong! Suck my dick! That's what's wrong with you! You fucking call me lazy! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on both of you!
Strong scene, huh? You're not really sure whether the guy behind the counter is trying to help or not. Like, you know, like you mix these, you're going to die, so don't. But then he doesn't get any response, and he pushes it even further, and he pushes the big button on the way, and boom. So that to me is Paul Thomas Anderson's filter, his worldview. LA, this particular situation, the negative and positive of it. 1 in 10 Americans are on Prozac or Valium today. It's a fact of life. It's just a standard issue. And yet that's not necessarily her story. So worldview could take that inspiration from the outside and craft something inside of you, because I think he was also going through his own stuff with the death of his father. It crafts something inside of you. You get that kind of tension, that kind of frustration that outsiders don't quite get. Any observations from your side on the scene?
Well, I took it as a different point. He's just thinking she's going to start selling some things and making some money off some prescriptions. And
Yeah.
Using so
Yeah.
he's trying to drill her like he would, like a cop would some skin who came from the street.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of innuendo both sides. It's really unclear. But I think that's part of the dynamism of the scene, is that it's not painted out very clearly. It's just these two worlds clashing into each other really quick.
There's even a couple times when you kind of think, is he asking if she's going to go party? Kind of like, is he interested in partying too?
Uh-huh.
There's even, you could take it so many different ways.
Yeah, you could. He's very ambiguous.
Yeah,
And sometimes really caring, like, don't mix these together.
exactly.
But ambiguous. And I think that kind of writing, remember we said about respecting the intelligence of the audience? Just kind of letting the person be the person, and then, because you're not really sure, you can't judge or know, and if you write it too on the nose or too clearly, it's like, well, it's not even interesting anymore, yeah. Okay, so that I think is a healthy example of outside inspiration, worldview, and coming up with an amazing scene. Here's the opposite of that. In this case, it's taking a historical element from a book, The Fast Food Nation, which was a New York Times bestseller, and trying to turn it into a story or a film instead of the documentary that it basically was.
The problem is, at this very moment, there's about 100,000 cattle in the UMP feedlot that's right outside of Cody. It's one of the biggest feedlots in the world. Each one of those cows puts out...
Yeah, that's Avril Lavigne.
50 pounds of piss and shit every day.
Watch how many times they say that term, too. It's like hilarious.
50 pounds each.
Lovely.
Yeah, I know. So that UMP feedlot produces more waste every single day than all of the people in Denver combined.
That's gross.
Yeah, and the waste from UMP's feedlot, it's not going to some high-tech treatment plant, you know? It's being pumped into these lagoons, which are these just great big ponds of piss and shit, and these great big shit ponds are leaking shit into Peyton Creek, which eventually ends up in the river.
I mean, you should see it. UMP's cattle, they're all just crammed together, living in their own manure, eating this genetically engineered crap that's being dumped into these concrete troughs for them. It's like prison camps for cows.
I love that. Avril Lavigne's best line in film, prison camps for cows. It goes on, but it's not very good. So Richard Linklater is the director here, and Linklater says in these interviews, he hasn't eaten meat since 1983. Sounds kind of pissed off that he hasn't a little bit, but he's got an agenda, and that agenda is, I think he fully believes in what he saw, but this was a bestseller as a doco, and he turns it into a film with Avril Lavigne and Bruce Willis and who's the guy in Training Day? Ethan Hawke. Yeah, the other guy. And, some pretty decent talent. They all come together probably because they're like, we think that these commercial farms are evil too. But the story's terrible. It's sort of halfway between Crash and some, 6th grade science film on how not to do things. And I think it's a very poor story. And I think one of the reasons it's a poor story
Even believe it.
is because... What happened? I went too far.
The problem is, at this very moment, there's a...
Shut up. What I think happened is you've got a historical event or something that's relevant, like commercial farming and meat today, and it's an issue. That's why it was a best-selling book, because it was really well done. Then you got worldview. I haven't eaten meat since 1983, and I don't think, and the agenda comes on top of that. You make judgments from the worldview, and the judgment is this is what you should think about this issue. Now, as soon as you get into that sort of area, you've got two things coming in. One is judgment coming in, like, what do I think about the issue? And that's how other people are going to judge me and my craft. So part of it, when you're making something, you start to think, what will other people think? That's the internal judgment. You got to be careful about that one. Part of it's good. You want feedback and collaboration. Part of it will kill you because you become too subject to what other people think. You water it down. So that's a judgment we could work on separately. I'm interested in this case in the judgment he takes on the issue and then turns it into a story that tries to say what the book did. This would have been a very good documentary, and because Participant Productions did it, Jeff Skull and his guys, that did Syriana and North Country and Good Night and Good Luck and Inconvenient Truth. They did 5 good films in 2006, I think. And then they made this one. Actually, they had Crash, and they turned on. They didn't want to do Crash. So they passed on the script. But Jeff Skull's, the guy that cashed out from eBay, he's making films with a conscience. He's doing some really good stuff, and then he lets this happen. I missed the point, because when I went to see it, I thought I was going to get a documentary, which is what the book was. If you want to make judgments on facts, you do documentaries. And this would have been a really good documentary, but they didn't. They turned it into a story with Bruce Willis and Greg Kinnear, selling smoked charcoal hamburger flavoring. And bad idea. And in that sense, you move from judgment to agenda. And my agenda is I want you to think this, I want you to believe this, and you move away from story and craft of that story into preaching and teaching. Yeah.
Do you think he would have made a bigger influence had he just documented actual facts on what's happening and more people would have changed over trying to push his agenda in a film?
Wait, say that last part again. I didn't quite get the last part.
Do you think he would have made a bigger
impact
on it, on the industry of big cattle farms
Yep.
and stuff, had he done more documentary based, factual, like this is what's happening, let me show you,
Yes.
over let me get some big Hollywood actors to try to push my agenda?
I think that's the only way you can tell a story like Fast Food Nation. It is a journalistic piece. It's a written documentary. That's the only filmic style I could see that it would actually fit into. Because that's why it became a best-selling book, is it told the facts. It told the story in a factual way without trying to be Bruce Willis and Avril, which you can't do with it. It changes it. It changes from fact to fiction again. And it wasn't. It was fact. And had he done a documentary, I think it would have had a much bigger impact, definitely, than this weak story. Because the story lost its soul in the process. It wasn't an interesting story. And they tried to make interesting stories, like the Mexican guys coming over and working in the factories, and tried to bring up a lot of different issues, of which they are. But then it became, again, a confusing form of Crash or Memento or something like that.
Then you look at like Super Size Me, and that was hugely popular. And
Yeah.
made a really big impact.
Yeah.
McDonald's changed their menu.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
It made a super big food industry
Yeah.
change the way it does.
Yeah. And that was more of a documentary, like real-time, reality TV sort of stuff, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
like it was him, it was something he was passionate about, and he had an agenda, definitely.
Yeah.
But he was out doing it himself. He was physically involved, and you saw him responding in the ways
Yeah.
people reacted and
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I hardly heard, I remember hearing something about they made a film of Fast Food Nation, but I never saw it. I never
Yeah.
heard a whole bunch about it.
Lucky you. Yeah. So that's right. You start with the heart of the story and think, well, how do I tell this better? And again, that's where the influences are properly being filtered through your worldview, not being grabbed on by this agenda or this, I must teach everybody this point, and start beating them over it, which is what we call rote.
So does that mean that the influences are actually a good thing?
Yes.
So that it
The-
can be used as negative things?
They can. Well, that's right. You can take them inside and block them up, or spit them out in another way with an agenda. So in this way, you're manipulating the external influences rather than flowing with them, and they may be amplifying them in a healthy way. O'Connor also says this: the novelist with Christian concerns will find in modern life distortions which are repugnant to him, and his problems will be to make these appear as distortions to an audience which sees them as natural. So you know that these certain things are off the wall and not healthy, but your audience thinks they're okay, they're not a big deal. So that's why American Beauty was such a great film. It just took the average suburban life and the pain in that, and it sort of amplified, it's not okay, this isn't okay, this is a lousy way to live. And look at the results of this kind of thing without preaching. It was just a really well done story. So it's got this, what she's saying is you can't take the things that are repugnant to you and just immediately make them appear repugnant because they're repugnant to you. They've got to be seen from the side of the view that says, I don't think this is bad. I don't think this is really that wrong. So I'll read it again. The novelist with Christian concerns will find in modern life distortions which are repugnant to him, and his problems will be to make these appear as distortions to an audience which is seeing them as natural. So, also, when we look at judgment, for instance, well, let's just go through this. We've got these inspirations, these external influences that are going on around us. Then we've got our filters, which we apply to them, which is always our worldview. And our worldview takes and interprets those things from our ontological point of view, what I think is real, my epistemological worldview, which is what I believe and how I know what's true or not, from my, is it axiological? Yeah, my axiological view, which is what I believe to be true, so now my faith system, my praxeological view, what I do, and then my teleological view, what I think is going to happen in the future. All those different aspects from the center out filter how we see the world around us. What is real, what I believe to be true, how I behave, that's our worldview, and we filter things with that worldview. Which is fine, because so far we're like everybody else. Everybody does this, and part of the communication model is to take my worldview and transfer it through the noise into your worldview, because we both got them. And a good writer or a good storyteller is going to do that in an accurate way without too much problems with the noise or trying to preach or teach in that process. But then on top of that, you've got judgment. And judgment's difficult because, have you guys seen The Kite Runner? Okay, brilliant story, good film. There's a part there where some men abuse a boy, or a man abuses a boy. And this was shot, I think, in Afghanistan. And And they had to wait until the kid left school and could get out of the country before they actually aired it, and they agreed to that with the father. But part of the problem was that they showed the script to the parents, and then when it came to shooting it, the parents were like, we can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. And so the director had a real problem with trying to communicate, well, this is part of the story and you agreed with the story. It has to be told in this way. And they found a compromise. But the judgment of the culture in this case on the issue of an Afghani worldview and an American worldview were very, very different. Like, it's okay to show this because we have to show the pain, and that's what the writer, who was also a Middle Easterner, did from his point of view, so it's okay for us to do it as well. We're not imperializing the story here. But when it came to actually doing it, cultures clashed, there were judgment issues. So you have to make a judgment. How do I tell that part of the story in such a way that doesn't damage this person or their family or the culture, and yet still holds true to the original as well? So those kind of issues are tough. And again, judgment coming in, judgment coming out. Judgment coming in, how am I going to be viewed for this? Could I get killed in this country by shooting this? How are other people judging my work by this way? Do they think I'm Christian because I shot this or not? And then judgment coming out, how do I view this? Is it okay to tell the story in this way? Is it truly beneficial? Am I masturbating on film just by doing it because I want to get an effect or get a result? Or am I really going to tell the story accurately and with integrity? So that's a judgment call. And judgment, again, goes over heart, soul, mind, and strength and starts to filter the decisions that you make. Again, not necessarily bad things, but things to watch as you're going through the process, because worldview will filter over into judgment. And then eventually, you've got agendas. And the agenda is, why am I doing this? What is the goal for me or the outcome that I'm looking for in making this film? It's really tricky because you want to tell the story with integrity, and sometimes you want the characters to be themselves and say it their way and even write the story in your head for you, because imagination can do that sometimes. But at the same time, is that agenda didactic? Like, I'm condescendingly looking down on you and saying, you must learn my values through this film. Or is my agenda great story, great timing, great flow, great energy, proper use of tension? Just professional agenda, or a heartfelt human agenda, like, this story is really important to me, I want to get this across to you guys. Have you seen what is that thing that Richie, what's his name, The Extras? Have you guys seen The Extras? Who's the guy that did the British version of The Office? English comedian. You know what I'm talking about, right? He does this thing called The Extras. It's brilliant. He's an extra on all these different films and television shows. And the film is like the side story, and he's the main story. What him and the other extras are going through, they're all trying to get their break. They're all trying to pitch their scripts and stuff. And everybody that comes on is very self-effacing. So Patrick Stewart will come on, as this brilliant, Shakespearean actor and stuff. And who's the guy that played Gandalf? Ian McKellen. Sir Ian McKellen will come on and talk about, acting, but in a really childish, stupid way. So they're all really self-effacing. Why am I telling this story? Oh, because on one of these things, Ben Stiller is directing this really heartfelt Kosovo movie about, trying to get out of Kosovo, and the guy's wife dies, which is a true story for the writer. And the writer's all like, my wife died, and that's why the scene needs to be like this. And Ben Stiller keeps going, okay. And finally he's like, F you, we're going to do it my way. And he throws the agenda out the water. And he just totally moves the story altogether, because he's mocking the whole thing of directing to try to be integral and stuff like that. If you have a chance, get on YouTube and watch these episodes. They're pretty killer. Kind of a weak way to make a point. But what I was trying to say in that is that agenda isn't necessarily a bad thing. You will have an agenda one way or the other, and your agendas can change as you move forward, but you want to know what they are. And you want to know if they're really helpful for you or not. For instance, a true story, there was a woman who went to her pastor and said, I would like to become a man. And I really feel like I am a man. And as a Christian, I feel like God made me a man. And I'm in a woman's body. And so the story is of her process trusting in a religious dimension in her life and having a faith in God, but feeling like she's really created as a man and wanting to change that. So immediately, what does your worldview inform you?
God doesn't make mistakes.
What's that?
God doesn't make mistakes.
God doesn't make mistakes. Okay, is that judgment or worldview? I'm not sure. Yeah, what did you say? That's bad. Evil. What else? Sin. Sinner. What else? Worldview. What is real, what you believe, how you behave, what you've been taught.
Makes me want to know what her growing up life was like.
Okay, so what is that? That is judgment. You are now trying to make a judgment about the thing. Go, what happened? How do I get more of the story here? Because I can't judge or I can't produce unless I have an accurate picture. So I may have a filter, evil, bad, God doesn't make mistakes, but in order to now carry on with using my mind, soul, heart, and strength, I need to have a proper view of the reality, right? So what do you do with that? How do you do that? How do you find out? Dig into the story. You got to research, right? Got to research. And it happens that this woman was actually born a boy. True story. What's that? No, not a hermaphrodite, but a boy. And in the circumcision operation, a laser circumcision, there was a mistake or a problem with the laser, and it fried the boy's penis. Completely gone. So the poor, confused parents were like, what do I do? Find evil doctor at the Mayo Clinic. Yeah, that one too. The Mayo Clinic. And this evil doctor determines that the way to help this child is turn it into a girl. Parents somehow buy into this insane reasoning, and for the next 12 years of this child's life, give it hormone treatments, operations, dress it as a girl, treat him as a girl, and becomes a girl, like for all intents and purposes. Like goes the whole 9 yards with this kid. And so you start doing the research, and you're like, wow, this is an amazing story for a number of different reasons. Poor child, mistake, accident, and then you've got evil doctor, confused or insane parents. You take your choice. The pain of growing up, and your research and your judgment allows you to go deep into this issue and go, wow, this is way beyond my worldview, what I thought was true because I didn't ask the question, which is often where agendas come from, is we skip straight into an agenda like, God doesn't make mistakes, that's my story. I'm going to tell the story about how God doesn't make mistakes, and this girl's going to stay a woman. So you dig, you research, you use judgment in a healthy way, you find the truth about the thing, and you tell a very different, much more engaging story. Much more interesting. No ability to preach or teach. Like I said, you inquire, you find the truth as much as you can, you find the pain, and you tell that story. And then you let everybody else figure out what to do with it.
That's a true story.
Yeah.
I saw the documentary about
Again from O'Connor, we Catholics are very much given to the instant answer. Fiction doesn't have any. It leaves us, like Job, with a renewed sense of mystery. St. Gregory wrote that every time the sacred text describes a fact, it reveals a mystery. This is what the fiction writer, on his lesser level, hopes to do. The danger for the writer who is spurred by a religious view of the world is that he will consider this to be two operations instead of one. He will try to enshrine mystery without the fact, and there will follow further separations inimical to art. Judgment will be separated from vision, nature from grace, and reason from imagination. So this is what happens when we jump in with the agenda. Reason and imagination actually separate, not come together. In fact, we think we're using our reason and our imagination to tell the story about how this girl should stay a girl. You know what I mean? But we've just lost the plot because of the prejudice in this case. These are separations we see in our society and exist in our writing. They are separations which faith tends to heal if by faith we mean walking in darkness and not a theological solution to the mystery. not a theological solution to the mystery. That's not our gig. We don't create theological solutions when God creates mysteries. And if you look at the Word, there's like a ton of mysteries. So going to mess with my recording. Just trying to think of one. Abraham's about to put the knife in Isaac, right? And you're thinking the whole time, God's in control, I believe, I feel good, I feel great. And right before he does, the angel goes, stop, now I know that you would do this. And you're like, wait a minute, now you know? You didn't know before? You know? There's a scripture in Proverbs 25:2 that says, it was the pleasure of God to create mysteries, and it's the glory of kings to unfold them. So that, I think, is not only a mandate for science, that's a beautiful story principle. That I create mysteries, it's the glory of others to unfold them. Not, I nail this thing with a theological solution that puts it in a tidy box and helps you just know what to choose and what to do. This is a controlling spirit. And so instead, I let the mystery be what it is, and I don't have to separate reason and imagination to do that. In fact, I really need the combination of reason and imagination to allow mystery to be what it is.
What was the reference?
Proverbs 25:2. It's when the individual's faith is weak, not when it is strong, that he will be afraid of an honest fictional representation of life. And when there is a tendency to compartmentalize the spiritual and make it resident in a certain type of life only, the supernatural is apt to become lost. So in thinking that we have faith, but actually it's weak, I overtell the story, I get didactic, and I've lost the supernatural in the process. If my faith is strong, and this is true in genetic engineering, how far can we go in genetic engineering? Well, we'll go as far as God wants us to, which happens to be pretty stinking far. So it's God who creates mysteries. We can unfold them, but I'm pretty convinced that if God doesn't want us to know certain things like Babel, he'll shut it down. If it's really going to be universally detrimental, he'll shut it down. If it could be used for good or evil, like nuclear power, he'll leave that one with us. Pretty risky, but that's how he works. So in the right sense, this way we get to have a strong faith that believes in a God who's created intelligence in other people, so that my fiction can be real and honest with the let's say the depth of the story, sometimes the pain or the darkness of the story, without having to resolve it too quickly. Leaving God's part with other people to kick in their intelligence, their constructs of God, to figure the rest out. That's what faith does. The other thing isn't faith at all. What is that? It's control. I want you to believe and think this, and I'll get you to get to that place. Let me tell you another story. This is also true. There was a woman, born a woman, who this time was a pastor, and believed that it was wrong for her to be a pastor as a woman. She has a sex change operation to become a man to fulfill her role as a pastor, also believing that that's how God made her. Throw at me a quick synopsis of a story that you'd put together with that. Think of the dynamics in her life. Think of her family. Think of her parishioners. Think of her leadership, elders. Think of her talk with God. Think of her relationship to healthcare or the cost of the change. Pick an angle, any angle. What would you do with that? If I zoom in, will it hold focus?
It should. I noticed it was doing some weird stuff with it
Okay. Explain that a little bit. The whale rider version of the woman who... This is good. I like this. Yeah, go ahead.
You know,
in Whale Rider, the girl wanted to learn how to be a true Maori, and but her father wouldn't let her because she was a girl. And
Yep.
it was prophesied that a man was supposed to lead the tribe.
Yep.
Who would lead the tribe was supposed to ride the whale, but they didn't have a son, so he was teaching the local boys in the village
Okay.
all the traditions of the Maoris. So I'm wondering, with the synopsis, could be kind of a similar story. This girl's kind of life and struggles going, trying to grow up as, as a leader, but yet her parents always say that it's the man's place.
Okay. Interesting. So you tell her story of what she believes she is in terms of leader and capable, and eventually turns into a man's world that she's looking for, that she didn't may think of that in the beginning, but she ends up at that place, gets the sex change operation, fade to black. I like that. That's a good story. What else? And while you're doing this, catch your filters. Tell me what you're tempted to do. Tell me what you're thinking, well, I wanted, there to be a power outage and God visits her in the operating room and, tell...
How about...
When you catch that, wave your hand up and go, I suck, and this is how.
How about on the lines of budgeting? Like, as far as, I think, like, she's getting paid from the church, right? Like, she's a pastor. So, her financial income is the body. And so, therefore, the body that's paying her to do her job is paying for this operation to be done.
Which they are.
As a member of the church, what do you think of in that perspective? It's like, well, I'm not going to get it. It's like the same as in, like, donors supporting me.
Yeah.
And me going and playing craps every weekend at the casino with their money. I don't think they'd be too excited.
So your story is how the church interacts with her financial decisions, seeing as they're the ones paying for it.
Yeah.
They're paying for her to become a man.
A good twist on a different type of...
Well, and it might not all be negative, because the truth is they did pay for it, she did do it. So her congregation backed her.
Yeah.
So that could be an interesting story of just the different dynamics or cameos within that.
Is she part of a certain denomination?
She is, and
like as the whole of the denomination.
Yeah, they took it under consideration as well. So, and there's some people in the denomination that are very much against it, and some are like, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's United Methodist. Go Chuck. So yeah, can you think of other angles?
Well, I would say the core, I just say she's weird and she's wrong. That's my judgment.
Okay.
I don't know why I say that, but that's just what I think, I guess.
Well, part of it, we don't know her. We don't know everything about the story. She may be weird and wrong as well, but it's not a story. You're weird and wrong. It's like a 2-minute little YouTube thing. So what would you do you could develop the story of part of the complexity, moving past our judgment into things I don't know. What might I want to find out or be interested in? Or what are some of the angles in a person's real world, like their relationship with their mom and dad or siblings or...
Like my first initial thing, she had to have some massive male influence in her life that did something like that, Like, just like that last story, how you said talk, you have to dig deep.
Sure, yep.
I would just say you have to dig deeper and see about the male influences in her life.
Right.
And stuff like that.
But again, you're kind of looking for something there, and okay if you want to tell that story, but then you want to ask, do I want to tell that story? Do I want to go with what, our neural pathways follow along simple grooves over and over again. So if I asked you to mention the top 3 or 4 rental car companies, you would do so according to the advertising dollars spent on those guys getting into forming that groove in your head, right? In advertising, it's called positioning. They spend all their time to try to realize that there are actually hundreds of rental car companies, but your brain is only going to care to think about 6 or 7 at the most. So positioning is to get their name at the top of the ladder. And this develops a neural groove that this is how you think. So it's so it's a knee-jerk reaction. It's a neural groove that we've been on. And so the first story isn't usually the best story, right? Because it's what everybody else thinks about the story. Bad father equals crazy girl pastor. Could be that's the story, or there could be nuances to that, like bad father or average father following in the line of tradition simply says that a girl can't be a leader. Not evil, plays with her, but plays other things with her, not what she wants to do. And and that sort of thing, where it's the nuance and the fabric of that nuance that forms into this worldview, that forms into the tension. That gets my attention. That keeps me into the story, because if you tell me the one I already know, I'm gone the first few minutes. So you could start with that and go, what's the male relationship? Because I believe the male relationships are an important part of our growing up. What was that? How did it pan out? If it's exactly what I thought, that's not an interesting story necessarily. It just shows, the typical. What's that scripture that says, whatever is true, whatever is beautiful, whatever is a good report, think on these things. Did you have a reference? Was that what you were saying? Philippians somewhere. There's redemption to the analogy. There's something that could be beneficial to people. Hopefully, please, not cheesy beneficial, but truly beneficial. So what I want to go looking for is, if I start with that assumption, God, please check me on that so I don't stay there, but can maybe use it to prod out so I jump my neural pathway into another groove or another lateral form of thinking, like Edward de Bono talks about, how you can actually move from this groove to another one just by forcing yourself, opening up a dictionary, finger in there and going, frog. Okay, what's the frog angle on this story, And then you're out there, and because you went out there, you find something that nobody thought of. And you come back to forming or forging the rest of the stuff. So in terms of our predisposition to judgment or agendas as Christians, and maybe this isn't unique to us as people, maybe everybody does this, I'm just preaching to this choir, we all have to find ways to jump out of the neural pathway into something a little more healthy. Whale Rider was beautiful because it was human. It was everybody's understanding of humanity and story, and that concept of the underdog. In a sense, it's the hero's journey, isn't it, as a child? And so everybody gets that part, but the tribe and the location and the wonderful acting by the grandfather and the daughter, or granddaughter, just brought all those different dynamics together into this beautiful story without being cheesy or weird. Okay, so from those stories, what we learn is that everybody has filters. We all have different ways of seeing the world around us. And the question is, are your filters helpful? And this is something I need you to analyze. I need you to go back through and go, what do I jump to when it comes to those films I don't want to watch? When it comes to the F-word simulation? When it comes to sex change operation stories, which I just gave you 2. What do I think about all day? It's not my fault. So what are the things that jump in first? And maybe that's okay, you learn to catch them and deal with them, but you want to know, are your filters really helpful or not? Do they block those external influences coming in, or do they inform and enliven them? Because they can do either. If they're blocking, then you want to catch that and find a way to go back into life with God and say, God, I'm afraid for some reason for life to touch me. And it could be for my upbringing, it could be my weird view of faith, or, come out and be ye separate from them, or I read the King James Version too much and don't know what that means anymore. Sanctification, by the way, doesn't mean coming out of the world God made. It means coming away from sinful, really destroying behaviors that are going to damage you and other people. But by no means does it mean disengaging from the real world around you. That's where the beauty and the action is. So it could be my view of faith. What is it that's doing? But is it blocking or informing you? The next point is, are you, through these filters, expressing something or trying to sell something? Because there's a difference. The artist expresses. Here's how I see it. The marketer is selling something. I want you to think or believe or buy this thing from me. And so I think it's important to map them. And for this exercise, what I want you to do, and I'll just give a few more things on what forms your particular filter. The first part, and I'm going to leave this as homework for you because I'm going to carry on with the teaching, but I'd like you to do this. It'll only take about 15 or 20 minutes to do. In mapping them is, first I want you to go through the 5 films that I ask you to write down what you would never want to watch and why. And I want you to write down next to each film what the filters are. What are the external influences that you don't want in your life and why? Like I think I mentioned in the assignment for me, Schindler's List, I never have watched it, I never want to watch it because I don't want that kind of pain in my life. Now my kids tell me I don't have the ability to cope with pain whatsoever, and therefore will block all forms of it, which are not too wrong for them. Like I know if I sit in a movie and it starts to make my heart race a bit, I don't like that. Like I mean, like, you know, really race. Like for 2 hours you're like, it's, you know, 80 or 90 beats per minute. And you're like, I could die before I get out of this theater. I'm a sensitive guy like that. So I don't necessarily like movies that are too thrilling, you know? Like I like certain movies like Jodie Foster, I think, does really great films like this. Like what is that place where they had the safe part in the house? Panic Room. That was a really well done story. And then the recent one that she did, where she's this vigilante, the brave one in New York. Kind of an interesting mixture of, you know, tension and then not tension, but also depth of character and story, like in the radio room where she's expressing or reading out their first program after the death of her husband. And it's just deep. You're just like right in her heart with her. You're like, wow, this is really hard to do. But it's not all about, you know, somebody's going to shoot you, turn around, turn over, turn around, you know. It's like all the time. I can't do that. So part of that's just physiological for me. I just don't want to expose my body to that. It's just not healthy for me. But the Schindler's List part, no, seriously, but the Schindler's List part isn't physiological. It's like there's enough pain, and I do not want to watch more Jews dying again and again and again. Over, and it's not because I become hardened to it. I don't think I've gotten to that point. I don't want to become hardened to it. I don't want to watch a guy shooting a kid walking across, you know, by taking target practice. Seen some of the scenes, I'm like, no, I'm not going to watch this movie. And that's a filter. Now, what I'm not sure about, if that's a healthy filter or not, needs to be analyzed. I need to think through it and go, what does me and pain got to do with each other? How much am I willing to cope with and why? And I don't look for gratuitous pain, like I must feel this because I want to be a writer, you know. I want to be able to be a real person, but I got to know that there are limits and boundaries. But are those limits and boundaries informed by a faith that was myopic and cryptic and weird? Or is it informed by something real about me as a person, as an individual, or something about how God made me or made us, that there are limits? And I have boundaries. Because in creation there are boundaries, they're a healthy part of it, but there's also what Winky Pratney calls, you know, boundaried unpredictability, where there are boundaries in the kingdom of God, but a lot of these are unpredictable and they shift on you a little bit. And part of that's just our uniqueness and our different ways of perceiving things and what we'd be willing to cope with and not. Even if we're both whole, we still have very different views on what we would take in and not. So you get the point? Write the films down, write the filters and why those filters exist. Don't try to judge them or analyze them too soon. Like, don't go, oh yeah, I suck here, here, and here. Just write down what the filter is and be aware of it and start to let that kind of bubble simmer inside of you a little bit. I want you to know, not necessarily where your boundaries are, I want you to know what your filters are. And by the way, this is a very simplistic exercise. It's not going to fully define the potential filters that you have because you won't know unless you hit those circumstances. Like, yes, go ahead and kiss him. But he's a man too. I know, kiss him. You know, then you're like, oh, there's another filter. So you may not know until you get to those. But if you're aware of it, See, my sense is that the beauty of what God does in terms of leading us isn't telling me what to do with my life, but instead the Bible says the Spirit will lead you into truth. So what it is the Spirit accompanies you with you in your life, and when things come up, you'll know how to treat them. But they do it through your personality and through your frameworks, and not dictating to you, but helping resonate with you how that really works. Which could easily make you able to shoot or be director or write a film like Brokeback Mountain. That could be no problem with the Spirit of God in you making a film like that. Because you will know in each circumstance, in each scene, what your filters are and why. And the thing is, the Spirit shows you the filter. Doesn't, again, predict or determine what you should do. Shows you the filter and lets you choose. Free will. Which is not only the basis by which God is able to judge us because He didn't choose it for us, but it's the basis by which we get to learn and fail and then learn again and grow and learn again and fail and keep doing that. So the Spirit, by speaking it out, by being aware, and this is my main point in filters, is by talking about it, you become sensitive to it. So the Spirit of God doesn't lead you into that space. It turns the light on and shows you the environment, and then you get to make adequate or accurate choices from that. Do you see the difference? One is like, don't do that, yes, no, turn left now, shut up, sit down. And the other one's like, here's the space you're walking into. Can you see it now? Okay, what do you want to do with this? And that's the Spirit leading you into truth. And by talking the language of filters, it shows you what kind of influences, negative and positive, are there. You're aware of them, the Spirit highlights them, and then you get to deal with that. What would I do with this? And so step number one is just simply being aware that these things are going through me, they're filtering all the time. I want to know what mine are, where they came from. So that's the first part of the exercise. Those 5 films, why you won't watch them, what are your filters? And the second part is, what informs those filters? So there's 3 aspects I want you to look at. The first one is faith. How has your Christian upbringing informed that filter? And again, keeping what Flannery O'Connor mentioned in mind here, that a strong faith is a faith that's able to leave room for darkness in the world around you like God does, without destroying everything that is dark and only leaving the light now. Because He's looking for the one that's lost, and he's able to cope with a fallen world in the interim. That's a strong faith. A weak faith is rock music's of the devil, and therefore anything with a beat and it's going to be bad, and therefore I will not watch a movie with a beat. I will not watch or listen to music that has, Led Zeppelin in it. So how has your faith informed you or misinformed you? The second one is your education. What have you learned in life that has affected this filter? And again, you're not trying to judge them and necessarily think that they're wrong or myopic, but you're just trying to say, where did it come from? Like, I was formed through this environment partially, and what was that formation, and how does it view whether it's cultural or whether it's the language that I'm used to or not? How my school or my parents or my peers have educated my value system. Okay? And the third part is basic life experiences. These are really strong. Psychologically, a basic life experience is what determines what the Bible calls the spirit of your mind's activities. So, for instance, a very good friend of yours, could do something very, very bad. Like, let's say they rejected you in front of all your friends, and that basic life experience taught you, I will never trust people again. That experience goes into what's called the spirit of your mind, and you are motivated and react from that experience. Not from what you think about people, like, well, not everybody does that all the time, but because it happened, everybody is like this. You know what I mean? It's not reasonable, but it's true in your life, and therefore that basic life experience informs or forms your worldview towards certain things. Like men are pigs. Why are men pigs? Well, because one person was probably a pig. Are the rest? Not sure, but the basic life experience informs that it probably is true. So what basic life experiences could you correlate back to those filters that you've mentioned? And is there something you want to be aware of that you're actually, for lack of a more tactful term, damaged goods? That the things that you've gone through has so heavily affected you in certain ways that you think you're a storyteller, you're not. You're looking for revenge. You're looking for a way to get this out back into somebody else's face. I find myself doing this all the time when I'm teaching. Really pissed me off that my dad left when I was 9. And when I talk about Father Heart, or when I talk about basic life experiences around that time, I'm very harsh and judgmental on these issues and can be very strong, which is also what I've reacted into some of the things that I do, like homeschooling or apprenticing my kids. I have pendulum swung so far in the other direction. I want to be like the best dad in the universe. And part of that's reaction. Part of it's good, biblical, healthy parenting. And yes, I'm right up there with the other top 5 because there's so many terrible dads in the universe. But a lot of that comes from this reaction to this thing that I don't want to be like, and I'm still really upset in a number of ways because of it. So that's an agenda. That's, I haven't eaten meat since 1983 and nobody else will, damn it. Not on my watch, sort of thing. Not all basic life experiences are going to be negative. There could be something that was just really strong and powerful, but it informs your filters. And it's something that may be part of your edge. I think Paul Thomas Anderson's real world LA living has informed a lot of his ability to write story that draws out some of the darker nuances of life, but from a redemptive angle. And the redemption isn't always clear, but it's there. So they're not all evil or bad. I'm not trying to judge them. I just say put it on the table so you can look at it and know this is what I'm working with.